Berlin, late autumn 1944. A faint frost clings to the cracked window panes of a third-floor apartment in Wedding. It is just past 9 in the evening, the blackout curtains drawn tight, yet a thin blade of blue light escapes from the dial of a Telefunken radio. Inside the room, a mother named Elizabeth Rockstroh cradles her 8-year-old son against her chest. The boy's breath is shallow. Rationed coal has left the air cold enough to see. Then, from the cloth-covered loudspeaker, a sound no Luftwaffe jammer can fully erase. The bright, impossible swing of Glenn Miller's In the Mood. The clarinet rises like sunrise over ruined roofs. Elizabeth's arms tighten around her child without thinking. Somewhere else in the city, thousands of other mothers do the same. This was the moment when American culture, carried on invisible wings of shortwave, slipped past the barbed wire of ideology and landed softly in German homes. It was not a bomb, not a bullet, yet it struck deeper than any raid. For years, the Reich had promised its people a 1,000-year empire built on iron discipline and racial destiny. Instead, in the darkness of total war, they heard dance music from a nation that still had butter, gasoline, and Saturday nights. To understand why a swing band could make a mother clutch her child, one must return to the broader war in the air and in the mind. By the autumn of 1944, the Luftwaffe had been bled almost to death. The combined bomber offensive was no longer a campaign. It was a daily apocalypse. In July alone, the 8th Air Force had dropped more tonnage on Germany than the Luftwaffe had managed against Britain in the entire year of 1940. Factories that once produced 1,200 fighters a month now struggled to deliver 300. Experienced pilots were gone, replaced by boys who had never flown in formation before their first combat sortie. Reichsmarschall Goering's boast from 1940, "If a single enemy aircraft flies over the Reich, you may call me Meyer," had become the bitterest joke in the Wehrmacht. Yet even as the skies filled with American silver, another front opened on the invisible spectrum between 49 and 25 meters. The American broadcasting station in Europe, ABC, began transmissions from London in early 1944, followed by the more powerful voices of the Armed Forces radio service. And every night, between news bulletins and calm Midwestern voices, came the music. Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw, Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey. To the propaganda ministry, this was degenerate Negro Jewish jungle music, banned since 1935, punishable by prison or worse. But the bans meant nothing when the signal was strong enough to punch through the jamming towers on the Tegelsee. German civilians quickly learned the schedule. At 9:05, the Miller Band would play Moonlight Serenade, its velvet opening a secret password. Engineers at Telefunken and Blaupunkt quietly redesigned sets with extended shortwave bands. Black market crystal detectors appeared in every bombed-out cellar. By October 1944, British intelligence estimated that 30 to 40% of German households were listening to enemy broadcasts at least once a week. In Hamburg, Gestapo raids confiscated 11,000 radios in a single month, yet the numbers kept rising. What the listeners heard shattered the caricature Goebbels had painted of the enemy. They expected plutocratic gangsters, racial inferiors, a nation of cowboys and Jews. Instead, they heard a society so confident in its abundance that it sent its finest orchestra leader across the Atlantic to play for soldiers who still received 4,000 calories a day, real coffee, and Chesterfield cigarettes. Miller himself had left behind a $20,000 a week contract in Hollywood to wear an army uniform and broadcast for free. That single fact, volunteering to earn less in order to give more, traveled farther than any leaflet dropped by the Psychological Warfare Division. The recurring symbol that threaded through every broadcast was the saxophone itself, brash, warm, and democratic. In the Reich, music had become regimented. Wagnerian thunder or saccharine marching songs. The saxophone had been officially condemned as animalistic, yet here it was, night after night, speaking a language of improvisation and joy that no censorship could translate into fear. In Cologne, a teenage girl wrote in her forbidden diary, "When the saxophone solo in American Patrol begins, I feel the walls of the shelter disappear. For 3 minutes, there is no war." In Munich, an elderly schoolteacher confessed to his priest that he wept during String of Pearls because it reminded him of the Weimar cabarets he had once denounced as decadent. The instrument became the audible proof that another life was still possible. The transformation was slow, subterranean, impossible to measure in divisions or tonnage, yet it eroded the foundation of the regime more surely than any battlefield reverse. Luftwaffe pilots returning from intercepting B-17s spoke bitterly of escort fighters that seemed to appear from nowhere, P-51 Mustangs with drop tanks that let them roam at will over Berlin. But when those same pilots tuned forbidden dials in their quarters, they heard the same music their wives and mothers heard at home. A secret report from the Sicherheitsdienst in November 1944 noted with alarm, "The population no longer believes that the Americans are short of material or morale. The music proves the opposite." In the ruined capital, mothers began to time their children's bedtime stories to the American broadcasts. One woman in Neukölln told a neighbor, "When I hear that clarinet, I know the bombs will come soon, but I also know the world has not ended. Somewhere, people still dance." Another in Charlottenburg kept a small notebook listing every Miller tune she recognized, as though cataloging evidence for a future trial against despair. By December 1944, Glenn Miller himself vanished over the English Channel. His aircraft lost in fog. The news traveled slowly into Germany, carried by the same shortwaves that had borne his music. When German housewives learned that the man who had given them moonlight and serenade was gone, many wept openly in air raid shelters, tears the regime could neither punish nor understand. In the end, the saxophone outlasted the swastika. When American troops entered German towns in the spring of 1945, they sometimes found civilians clutching homemade crystal sets like talismans. In one apartment in Darmstadt, soldiers discovered a child's drawing taped above a battered radio, a golden saxophone surrounded by stick figure families dancing under a sky free of searchlights. The war that began with promises of 1,000 years ended in 8 months once the factories stopped and the pilots died. But the war in the soul of a continent ended earlier, quietly, in living rooms where mothers held their children tighter while a forbidden clarinet rose and fell like breathing. They had been told that freedom was chaos, that abundance was corruption, that joy itself was enemy propaganda. Then they heard 32 bars of swing drifting across the night, bright as contraband sunlight, and something irrevocable shifted. Long after the last bomber had turned for home, long after the cities burned and were rebuilt, the memory remained. A mother's arms tightening in the dark, a saxophone refusing to be silenced, proof that even under the boot of history, the human heart will recognize its own song and answer. That recognition, soft, unstoppable, democratic, was the first faint note of the peace that would follow.